Okay, great. We'll go ahead and get started now. So once again, everyone, my name is Michelle Fowler, and I'm a Customer Success Manager here at Quorum. And we are here to discuss unifying state lobbying and grassroots teams. So before we dive in, just a couple of housekeeping items. First, this session will be recorded, and you'll be receiving a recording after the event. Also, you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen that there's a chat box. So there's the session section and then the Q&A submission form. We encourage you to use the chat throughout the session to share insights, and then you can also submit your questions to the Q&A form. And then we'll go through the questions at the end of the presentation. And so with that, we'll go ahead and dive into the content. And I'm really excited to be sharing the stage here with Robert Morris and Kara Nett Hinckley. So just a little bit about them. Kara Nett Hinckley is the National Vice President of State Policy at the ALS Association. She has nearly 20 years of expertise in state regulatory and legislative policy and advocacy, and in the nonprofit sector, having built high-impact, high-yield state policy departments dedicated to growing collective patient power across women's health and chronic disease communities. She's an appointed consumer representative with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners and is a veteran. And then we have Robert Morris. Robert is the Managing Director of Advocacy at the ALS Association. He is an expert in public policy, advocacy, and the implementation of efficient cross-functional workflows. Prior to his role with ALS Association, Robert worked with the American Cancer Society for over 25 years in various senior level positions. In his current role, Robert leads the charge in advancing ALS advocacy efforts throughout the Southeast. So welcome again, both of you. So Kara, would love to start out with you first. I know that the ALS Association just launched its state policy and advocacy department last year. Can you tell me a little bit about your structure and some of your early wins?
Absolutely, Michelle. Thank you, first of all, for having Robert and I on today. We're very excited to talk about our kind of year one of a state advocacy program. And I think in just keeping with the spooky theme, there's cats outside fighting. So if you hear that background noise, that's what's happening. I think they're just cheering us on. So yeah, I'll kind of start off with kind of a 30,000 foot view of how we kind of started and where we are today. So I came on board in June of 2022. I'm sure many of you remember the Ice Bucket Challenge of now 9-10 years ago. But because of that, we were able to really strategically invest and build out the vision to create a really hyper-focused, hyper-targeted, unified state policy shop. And so with that, we launched it in 2022. And with the idea that we would be in both state legislative as well as regulatory arenas, as well as on the local level. So kind of the first thing we wanted to tackle was creating a unified, streamlined kind of policy menu. So we call it our Unified State Policy Agenda. And what we did was we secured feedback from listening tours, from people living with ALS, caregivers, providers, from longtime staff of the association, as well as our board of directors and coalition partners, and really was able to take into account what folks are saying on the ground that was most important to them. Our main goal is making ALS livable for everyone everywhere until we find a cure. And so with that, we needed to figure out what are the most impactful, hyper-focused items that we can drive across the state levels that keep us from mission creep, that keep the guardrails on, and that we can really properly resource so that we can be really effective across the states. So with that, we created a policy agenda that had 10 items. And of course, more than 10 items sort of came up from that listening tour. So we conducted a fit analysis. For those that aren't familiar with that, it's feasibility, impact, timing. So though I'll say telehealth and prior authorization. So though you may want, you think telehealth might be more impactful for your patient group or your constituency, you know that prior auth is more feasible because it has run the last 2 sessions. Everyone's very familiar with it. So it might actually be that one is prioritized above telehealth. So hopefully that example kind of paints a picture of it. So with that, we were able to organize our top 10 issues, with really the top 3 being state appropriations for ALS care services, Medigap, and also Genetic Testing Protection Act, which basically makes it so that life, long-term care, and disability insurers cannot discriminate based on genetic testing, either in issuance or in pricing. So we already have those protections for health insurance. We wanted to see them applied to the other insurance markets. So in year one alone, we took positions on 403 pieces of legislation and saw 113 of those pieces passed into law and signed. Also, as you mentioned in my bio, I secured a 2-year appointment as a consumer rep with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. And with that appointment, so you're appointed as an individual, but I get to represent the ALS Association, if that makes sense. And because of that, I also get to represent the rare disease community more broadly, which there hasn't been a rare disease seat on the NAIC Consumer Rep Board before. So my kind of goal is to make sure that there is always a rare disease rep there moving forward. So what does that appointment really mean? So because of that appointment, I've been able to weigh in, redline, make recommendations, comment on the best practices that NAIC and the guidance that they're putting out, white papers, model legislation or model regulation, what they're putting out, we get to sort of inform that from a consumer vantage point. They really look to us to provide the consumer lens to a lot of the work that they're doing. So that work can be putting out, a white paper on best practices for state regulation of pharmacy benefit managers or PBMs, the use of AI for approvals or denials within the health insurance industry, all the way to holding private right of action within the mortgage industry, and updating state guidance on best practices for prior authorization and other utilization management tactics, to sort of name a few. And I'll throw it back to you, Michelle.
Great, thank you. So Robert, under the structure that Care described, I know that you lead the state and advocacy in 2 states, Florida and Georgia.
Yes.
Want to know, what are you focused on in those states specifically, and what sort of coalition or contract support do you use to help drive your work?
Yep, thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. Thank you, Kara, for your leadership and what you help us do for ALS, and Michelle, thank you for facilitating today. So I am newer to the organization, although it'll be a year in January. I have been working solely in Florida during that time, and just recently have taken on Georgia, and we'll start to work in Georgia. So just for kind of clarification there, so I haven't even had, not with ALS, my first session in Georgia yet, although so I'm doing a lot of background work right now. But specific to Florida, in addition to what Kara mentioned, the kind of those 10 priorities that she mentioned, there's several things that have kind of bubbled up in Florida. So we have a rare disease advisory council that was stood up in Florida, but they had to get going, right? So we engaged with them. What did that look like? How do we strengthen that? We did work around prior authorization reform, telehealth access. We have great telehealth access in Florida, but we don't have the gold standard telehealth. So what are those opportunities there? And so we did a lot of watching. We had bills that popped up, and through Quorum, a great tool that allows us to kind of track and see what's happening. We had some bills and some language that were trying to be snuck in that we were able to take positions on and talk with members, and it's a great resource for us to be able to allow us to do that. But we primarily focused a lot around appropriations this year for Florida, and so we went from $1 million in funding the year before to this year $2.5 million in funding for appropriations that allow our ALS certified clinics to provide more services to ALS patients, which is a tremendous benefit to those patients primarily, but also to those clinics who were really losing money by having these clinics and these days. And when really what an ALS clinic does is it allows patients to go to a clinic, and in one day they'll see everybody that they need to see during that day. So they'll see occupational therapy, speech therapy, their neurologist, their social worker, you name it, they see everybody, instead of having to come back multiple appointments during the week or over the course of 2 weeks. And you can imagine with an ALS patient and family members, especially if you're in a wheelchair, and can imagine what it takes to just to get ready, right? It takes hours just to get somebody ready to be able to then get to the hospital. And to be able to do these ALS clinics has been tremendously important. But coalition work, as you asked, Michelle, has been critically important. There's many of you all on the call today are part of these coalitions that do a lot of the work of the things we mentioned, and we engage with many of those coalitions. Many of those coalitions take the lead on issues, and we're right there in support, or we take the lead, and others, kind of join forces with us. We do have contract support in Florida. We have focused on contract lobbyists that really are good at the relationships in Florida, and also with primarily appropriations, because that's been our large focus this past year. So I'll stop there, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. So the issues you highlighted are really important ones, such as with appropriations and whatnot. So Kara, my question is, do all the managing directors of advocacy focus on the same issues in their states and territories, or what do they do?
Yeah, good question. And I'll step back for a second. So structure-wise, there are 10 managing directors. So I have 10 Roberts, and they're all amazing, just like Robert, luckily. And so they manage, anywhere from 1 to kind of 6, 7 states, depending on just the way the territories are broken up. So we have 10 territories that cover all 50 states and DC. And then, I think to Robert's point, I'm getting a weird echo. Hopefully that was just for a minute. To Robert's point, knowing what's important on the ground is really critical, and our ability, I think, to be able to be responsive to what is bubbling up. And if there's momentum on an issue that makes a lot of sense for the ALS community, it may not be on our state priorities list, but we may take action on it. So I think, you want to watch for that mission creep. You want to keep your guardrails on, but you also want to be nimble enough that you can pivot and take on an issue, kind of thinking of that fit analysis again. Does it make sense? What's the impact? What are our resources like? Can we do this? I think 2 examples come to mind from just this past year. So one was in Washington State, and it was a diversifying clinical trials bill. And we decided to take a position on that of support, and then also advocated and had kind of boots on the ground work around the issue. We know that people of color are diagnosed with ALS later, and that's also similar across other rare disease areas. So that delay in diagnosis, we want to really get at that to make sure that we're not leaving out key folks in our community. We don't want to leave out anyone. So making sure that we're sort of laying the groundwork to create a pathway to earlier, more appropriate diagnosis, which then leads to earlier, more appropriate therapies. We know that drugs are coming to the market that can delay some of the symptoms of ALS by months, giving folks a little bit longer time with their families and loved ones. And obviously, we hope that a cure is realized, but until we get to that point, really, it is critical. Obviously, the early access to diagnosis and making sure that the color of one's skin doesn't determine their diagnosis rates. Also, with regard to medical debt, that's the other issue I wanted to bring up. So in the state of Colorado, there was a bill that would prohibit medical debt from being included in your credit reporting calculation. And I should say both of these bills were successfully passed. And we certainly want to fan the flame to have these pass in other states as well. We took action with the coalition on the medical debt in Colorado. And then we also made that a central part of our state action day. Again, even though it wasn't on our policy agenda originally. So someone living with ALS can pay out of pocket anywhere from like $80,000 to as high as we've seen $250,000 a year because of their ALS. So and we also know exorbitant medical bills are responsible for 40% of bankruptcy in our country. So we want to be responsive to what we're hearing on the ground. I think a good example of something we don't prioritize, but we see across multiple states are the creation of state registries. So state registries don't really help people get diagnosed faster or connect people to care more quickly. And given that states' resources are pretty finite, we believe they're just more effective legislative measures that state lawmakers can really focus on. We advocate at the federal level. I think this is a good juxtaposition of the different work of our teams. So at the federal level, we advocate and secure just over 10 million a year for the National ALS Registry and Biorepository. And that's really a central resource for ALS research, public health surveillance. So again, we think on the state side with funding, funding clinics, ALS clinics, and care services is really where we want those dollars focused. That being said, if there's a big enough cohort of ALS advocates in any given state who want to support a registry for ALS, we're happy to provide support, materials, guidance. We'll certainly advocate that the data from that registry be shared with the NIH and with the CDC's repository, but we're just not going to lead on that issue.
Yeah, that makes sense. So thank you for that, Kara. So Robert, educating and activating advocates, I imagine, is super critical to getting these issues, as you and Kara have described so far, over the finish line. What strategy and tools do you find most helpful to do that?
Yeah, thank you. So that's a great question. That is, we could spend days and hours on, right? It's so critically important. One, I would say, I'll start with adding to it, just identifying, good advocates, right? And it's really important for us. In a rare disease site like ALS, there are fewer people that just kind of proactively come out at times, right? And so we have to do some education. So the power of social media, the ALS Association telling its story really helps to start to drive and identify people that are willing to help us, so that we can do some of those things. And once we have them, then how do we engage and further and educate and activate them, right? It becomes really important. And so in what I'm doing in the Southeast is what a lot of my colleagues are doing, and is to really work with those who have already taken action. So I started off when I started this role and looked at Quorum, and I said, who are my, I knew the people that bubbled to the top, just that everybody said, oh, this is your advocate, this is a great person. But then I wanted to know a little bit deeper on who are those that take action, who anytime we send an alert out, anytime we do something. So I mined the data that we have, right? And I looked and said, who are my top action takers? And I had individuals that just popped up that they are like Johnny on the spot. They're quick to respond. They're active. They're engaged. They're calling. They're texting. They're emailing. They're doing whatever is being asked of them. And so I reached out to them and I asked them. I said, hey, I want you to do more with me. Can you do more? And so I set it up, even though we're talking about state advocacy here, I set it up using my federal districts, and use the 28 federal districts in the state of Florida, easier than using the hundreds, as you can imagine, across the state of House districts. But I wanted to use those 28 to identify 28 individuals who I could go to at any time and say, across your district, whatever district that is, including then now all the House, and thinking of it, all of the House and Senate districts across for the state perspective, I want you to be that first person to help me engage and to ensure that we always have somebody kind of engaging. So on that, so Quorum and that became really a huge opportunity for me. We built an advocacy committee. We actually had an advocacy committee as a part of our board in the realignment of the ALS Association. We took that a step further and actually expanded that advocacy and policy committee to really then to have that top line, even grass tops level volunteer that at any point I can call and they can pick up and talk to a member of the state house, leadership, a member of the Senate in the state. That becomes really important for us. And then the educating of volunteers. We at the ALS have done a great job in mobilizing our volunteers and to really give them the tools and everything that we need. And so I just simply, anytime I have an issue that come up, I say, hey, we're having a conference call, much like we're doing here. We're having a webinar. Please join and let's talk about the issue. We had an advocacy day or action day at the Capitol. Prior to that, I had everybody who was going to come to that. I had them all the materials that they needed. I had all the access to everything they needed. We put them with my great volunteers. We put them through a little bit of what is a visit going to be like, right? And so you think of our ALS volunteers at the Capitol, ALS patients and families. And we had set meetings that we had because we had specific things we were trying to do at that meeting during that day. But I had many members of the House and the Senate in Florida who took notice of us being there and wanted to meet with us, and we weren't even on their list to meet with. and which is really a testament to being present and being there, right? And that becomes important. And it's one thing if I'm there or my lobbyists are there, but I need to have those volunteers engaged and activated and present, talking to their members, right? Always informing their members of what's happening. So that became really important for us. So I think as a strategy, it's really focusing in on the people that and the advocates that are willing to do the work while we're building new advocates, and to really focus and give them the resources and tools that they need to do their work. I'll say that.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Lots like the most common question I receive from clients all the time is how are they identifying like who their top advocates are or who has potential to be their top advocates?
Yeah, and again, I'll go back to they're there. I mean, if you're using these tools like Quorum, they are there for you. You just have to go mine it and find them.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Robert. So, Kara, for you, what have been the biggest challenges in standing up a new state advocacy program? Do you foresee any new challenges on the horizon?
No challenges, no issues on the horizon, just perfection, smooth sailing. I'm kidding. I'm absolutely kidding. I wanted to hop back and say something to what Robert was saying. And I think it's just, a thank you and appreciation for just thinking about Robert's work in Florida alone, how that then informs the work in other states and the ability of the managing directors of advocacy in other states to pick up what he's using in Florida, what he's created, to pick that up and run with it. So we are not in the business of recreating the wheel in every state. I think that was kind of happening on a one-off basis before. And so with the creation of our state advocacy shop, with bringing on Quorum as our trusted partner and not only bill tracking and advocate engagement, but it's also our repository. So the way that we use it, any testimony, say where someone's giving testimony on a telehealth bill in California, they are saving that into the Quorum system and tagging it under the issue so that, if somebody gets word, oh, there's a telehealth bill coming up in committee at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I'm going to go and give testimony, it's not the house on fire as it was before. It's as simple as going into Quorum, pulling up the issue, and then looking at the documents that we have saved in there. And so because of that, I think it's given so much more time back that we can spend connecting with advocates, doing the data mining that then results in the big impact. Now I'll hop back to your question, but I did want to lift up that's such an important perk and where we are now that we've had a year under our belt as a state policy shop. So to your question on challenges and standing up a new program and new challenges kind of on the horizon. So, I think Robert also talked about this. One of the biggest challenges is always telling the story of the work that we're doing in an effective and measurable way, and then also collecting those patient and caregiver stories. So, unfortunately, we don't have the benefit of taking survivors to the Capitol to meet with policymakers year after year and really building and fostering these long-time relationships. So upon diagnosis, someone given a diagnosis of ALS is given 2 to 5 years to live. So that's why our work is incredibly urgent. It's also unique in that way. So the patient stories that you hear from the ALS community are truly the legacy of these individuals that want to see change that they know oftentimes will not benefit them directly, but all those that come after them. So we really depend on Quorum to create those meaningful advocacy action opportunities for people living with ALS. So whether it's to inform a policymaker or to participate in a state action day or invite them to advocate from the comfort of their own home. Robert mentioned just the daily activities of, daily living activities of getting ready, bathing, getting ready, getting in a chair, getting in and out of a car. So mobility is a huge issue. And because of the tools that we've procured and that we use, we really create a space where folks can be armchair advocates from the comfort of their home. They can take meaningful action. They can build relationships in a way that, 20 years ago just wasn't possible. I'll say too, because of our ability to both inform and activate ALS advocates through Quorum, that we took the state funding dollars, Robert mentioned 1 million to 2.5 in Florida. Overall, we went from 6 million in 2022 to over 20 million in 2023, largely in direct care service dollars. So that's putting ramps on homes, hold bars in a bathroom. It's funding loan closets to provide power chairs to people so they can stay active members of their community. And then I also wanted to add, something around challenges or just kind of planning ahead. Year one, we wanted to jump in and be as hyper effective as we could. We were really looking at the numbers and wanting to have high metrics, which would indicate high output at the state level. So we were able to do this. We were able to get Medigap in Kentucky. What does that mean for people living with ALS in Kentucky? So I think one thing that we're kind of now in a position where we can step back, we can look at what we've done over the past year and then plan more proactively ahead, is making space for those education campaigns. So we've been so reactive and just push. We haven't sat back and thought, okay, of these other issues that maybe they don't have legs in South Carolina this year, maybe a copayment accumulator ban isn't going to happen. But what we do need to do is think about, okay, how about an education campaign? Maybe it's a 2-year effort where you're educating policymakers, regulators, partners, the patient community, really educating them, as well as industry partners. I always think pulling in folks that aren't always in conversation with you, I think that's critically important. It also softens the ground so that once you do get a bill a year or two from now, all the way through implementation, the ground is softer. The implementation process is smoother. Your implementation is going to be more meaningful when people really understand the issues that you're advocating for. And then last new challenge, state budgets. We all are following the experts at NCSL or at NASBO, and we're getting the sense that state budgets will be tightening. So I think we need to be really thoughtful about our asks and really honed in as well on the ROI. Certainly something that organizations like ours have to do is also level set expectations, really paint a picture of reality. Those big numbers going from 6 million to 20 million in a year, that's unheard of. So yes, let's celebrate it, but also let's level set. Let's be really honest and upfront about what's attainable kind of moving forward. I think that that's incredibly important, especially in an organization where you have other facets that don't do a lot in advocacy. They don't do a lot in state level. They don't really have the understanding that we as state lobbying and advocacy professionals do. So they may think that it's realistic to assume you can get 20 million new dollars every year. It's just not. So I think also building into your engagement strategies, the sort of, hearts and minds strategy. So having a patient that can connect the dots between $1 into their ability to put food on the table while struggling to afford medications. Having that person there that can really tell the story of why every one of those state dollars is really important. I think that's really critical to building an effective strategy, especially in these next few years of tighter state budgets. That COVID money, the relief money is being spent down. And so I think we all need to be kind of cognizant of that.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Kara, for detailing that all out. I know I work with a lot of patient advocacy groups here at Quorum, and a lot of the challenges you describe I know are directly applicable to them too as well. So Robert, I do have one more question for you as well.
Okay.
Being a newer member of a new team, what have been your aha moments since joining the ALS Association, and what advice would you give to someone who is just stepping into a similar role?
That's a great question with a lot of parts. I'm going to take it maybe 2 different directions. Coming to ALS, where when working and managing the advocacy program, kind of like in that state at least, kind of I'm it, right? There's no other those states. There's no other person. There's not a team of people. And so for me, personally, coming from an organization where I had a a team of people. I had grassroots staff and maybe multiple, even in larger states, multiple staff that were working on issues. Was a little bit different, but an aha to go for me was, it was really no different in terms of how I mobilized and activated the volunteers that we work with, right? Because that's really where the work gets done. Yes, we do a lot of back end work. Certainly, we and all of us as advocates, working in state legislature, state house, capitals, but also our contract lobbyists if we have them. But it's really the power, the voices, as Kara said, the stories of those individuals to mobilize. The challenge, I think, and then on the second part for me was the lack of really the understanding of the disease by many elected officials. And to go and talk to them about ALS and any, really, I could insert probably any rare disease, is much more challenging than what I experienced in my 25 plus years prior, coming from the cancer space, where millions of people were affected by cancer, whereas in the ALS space, it's just, goes down into the thousands or tens of thousands, right? And so on an annual basis. And so telling the story became different. And so the aha moment for me, which is something I've always lived by, but really became really more important for me to kind of translate to all of those that are helping us do the work we're doing in my states, which was going from the what we do to the why we do what we do, right? So the what is, just advocate on behalf of ALS patients. The why is to make ALS a livable disease, right? And the impact of making ALS a livable disease, when you lead with the why, became much more effective and important to be able to tell those stories to the members that we needed to work with, and really kind of change their mindset in many ways. And that was really beneficial. So that, I would say, was a good aha. And I would say for anybody that's kind of coming into a new role like this, especially for any organization you're coming in, obviously take time to learn the background. If it's a disease space, if it's a patient space, learn the background. For me, it was learning the progression of the disease, the consequences of those affected. Kara and I both have talked about the tremendous impact something like ALS and really any rare disease is going to have on families and patients. It's mind-boggling and staggering what they experience. And this helps provide that empathy, with the community that we serve. And so I think taking that time, because we all know how to do the advocacy work, right? We all know how to go in and probably, talk to legislators, find a champion, get a bill drafted, but it's the nuances behind it that I think I would encourage us as we, continue to do this work, is to get behind that why and to push and emphasize that more than just the what.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So for everyone on this call now, we now have time to ask questions to our speakers directly. So please feel free to submit something in the Q&A section in the chat. But I can kick us off. A question I get from my clients all the time with similar structures as you, or just starting state advocacy and lobbying, is what are my peers doing when it's an off session? When the legislative is not in session, what are they doing to prepare? How are they keeping their advocates engaged? I'm kind of at a loss at what I can be doing to get ahead when things get up and running again. Was wondering if either of you had any advice to that.
I'm happy to hop on, and then I'll throw it to you, Robert, if you have anything to add. I love this question because there's no such thing as an off season. I think for a lot of us who step into state policy and advocacy, you kind of, on paper, you're like, okay, it's like a roller coaster, right? Session, busy, budget months, busy, pre-session meetings. It's 24/7. It is an all on front all of the time. I'll say that there's not a single state where we're not constantly working on something. And I talked about the educational campaigns before. It's our idea to kind of build a larger umbrella evergreen campaign stateside that is really building patient power across the states. And what can that collective power be doing? There's always something to be doing. And so I think of the ABCs that always be closing, we need to always have actions for advocates to be taking, to pull them in, to find out what their interests are, how they can connect to the movement. in, better, smarter, more enjoyable ways. And then also how to create more streamlined processes so that an advocate in Alaska has the same opportunities as an advocate in Texas or New York. I think also something that is really important that maybe we don't always name is the kind of networking aspect of our work and how important it is to always be in relationship with key partners, business development purposes. Are there issues? Have you thought about issues that, may include some unconventional partners that you can be connecting with when you have a down week, if you will? I don't know what a down week looks like. Let me know if you guys find one. But I think, an issue that comes to mind are, home modification tax credits. It's not often that you see the ALS Association at the table with the Home Builders Association, but it should be, right? We should be thinking out who those unconventional partners are and how we can be meeting with them. The Colorado Chronic Care Collaborative is a really unique patient-centered group out in the state of Colorado. Obviously, they've been around for over a decade and they've just done some really amazing work. Selfishly, I was staff of the Chronic Care Collaborative when I was with the MS Society back in 2009, 2010. And one thing that we prioritized doing was sitting down during off-session months with who are our natural adversaries at the Capitol. So we would sit down with the Association of Health Plans, for example. We started doing that in 2010 and made it a point that we were going to do that every year. And what it does is it humanizes the conversation. It creates networking and communication pathways that didn't exist before. It just takes some of the sting out of what can be really hot, difficult topics at the Capitol. So that's certainly something I recommend. As it comes to work-life balance, I can't recommend anything there, but I can recommend what you can do during your off-season time at state policy work. Yeah. Robert, am I forgetting anything?
I don't think so, Kara. I think you answered it what I would have said too. So thank you.
Yeah, that was really great, Kara. Thank you. I really love the idea about focusing on relationship building, especially with people like on paper seem obvious as like allies to team up with, but also like reaching across and like talking to your adversaries as well. That was really interesting. We do have a couple questions in the chat now. So one is from Erin. She asks, what has been your biggest struggle and success in motivating your grassroots advocates?
Yeah, I'll jump in if that's okay for this one. So that's a great question, Erin. Thank you for asking. So I think the biggest struggle is for me at times is finding not only enough people, enough advocates, enough grassroots advocates, but it's finding the right grassroots advocates that are willing to put in the work that is needed. Sorry, I had a little background, but so the work that is needed. So, just because you have somebody in name, if they're not taking action, if they're not doing what you need to be doing, that can be a struggle, and it can be frustrating because the intent is there. It's like, okay, what is it that's going to motivate them? And so on that motivation side, it's really has been, for me, it's been asking the questions, what's enough, what's too much, but it's really being nimble and being flexible. So when messaging is going out, if we're not seeing a lot of action on that, to be able to then adjust and to then go a different direction, a different path. And that has been really important for us to be able to do, and to not just settle for this is the way we should do it. If there's another opportunity or another path, then let's explore that and engage in those conversations. That has been really really important. And I think I think with us, for me, with the advocates, it's they like to hear from me, but they also like to hear from each other. So getting them together and encouraging them to talk to each other, that's been really important. I love that. I think that's a good success that can help as well.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Robert. And so another question that's in the chat from Teresa is, how are you all thinking about elections? Does this play a role in your advocacy strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. That's a really great question. And I think it's a great question to be asking our shop, because we are in the brainstorming process of what an electoral advocacy plan looks like for us. We're asking the questions and spending time kind of brainstorming what this can look like. So I will say where we are is in the education, curiosity, and sort of socializing the idea of having an electoral advocacy plan. And with that, it's also working with everyone in our organization, pulling in folks from finance team, folks from development. What can that actually look like? So we don't currently. I should have also added, like, obviously marketing communications, pulling them in and talking about earned media, paid media, geo-targeting, electoral, sort of more electoral advocacy. And I think too, really the basics of educating folks in the community on why it's important. I think that will be sort of our biggest first hurdle from electoral advocacy, but also just around voting rights. There's a number of states that we all know still don't have accessible voting locations. And for our folks, it's vitally important that we have accessible locations. And that includes drive up, and mail in. So I think just getting that included as something that is a priority for us is going to take time. It's socializing the idea. And we'll get there. Maybe that's a year 2, year 3. But yeah, it's a fantastic question for a newer shop.
Yeah. Can I add to beyond even the electoral program? I think I know myself and my colleagues are always thinking about what's happening in elections, because things have a tendency maybe to shift, right? So it's going to be a shift in leadership. If there's a predictive model around, okay, we're likely to see a shift here, then your strategy may change. When things do happen, maybe you get a surprise or two, right? Maybe a power assumes control, or a supermajority now is in play, then your strategy may have to be different. So I think that becomes really critically important to, the strategy that happens in states, in certain states, Florida being one of them. When you're a newly elected member of the Florida House, then you're a part of the freshman delegation. Those of us from Florida would understand and appreciate this. They will start to identify current leadership will start to identify who are future leaders going to be in the years ahead. And so as a freshman, those people start to get tapped on the shoulder for potential leadership so those become individuals that as they get elected, you want to even build maybe different relationships with, because that in the future, maybe 3 sessions down the road, they may be a speaker, or 4 sessions down the road, they may be a speaker, whatever it may be, or some key chair elections as we look at it as well. So another great question, Teresa.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I know a lot of also my clients are asking about 2024 election planning too. Another question came in from the chat from Tim. He asks, what skills would be needed to make a good hire for a possible new advocacy program?
That's Kara.
I'm rereading it. What skills would be needed to make a good hire for a possible new advocacy program to offer clients?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it just has a little drop down. I'm trying to figure out what the real ask is here. So I'll say for a new advocacy program to offer clients, sorry for the weird echo. I think anytime you're creating a new program, the most important skill at the onset is the ability to listen and to be an active, engaged listener. I don't think we would have had the success we had in the first year and a half had we not spent the time getting to know the folks on the ground, spending time asking questions, doing the fit analysis that I mentioned earlier, and really creating the relationships that then build the trust, so that people trust that you were the expert in your position. You were brought here to do a job and to create something that is really key to the organization reaching its mission, right? To that North Star, which again for us is making ALS a livable disease until we have a cure. So, getting to know people, don't come in with all the answers. So you want someone who's confident in their skill set and that has the experience, but who can be quiet and listen, and then move from a point of curiosity into strategy and then implementation. I'll say new advocacy programs, oftentimes don't have they don't have limitless resources. I don't know where you're coming from, but speaking from a nonprofit sort of sector, I think it's incredibly important that you have somebody who kind of can be nimble and pivot, and who can sort of do all the things that need to be done when they need to be done. So there's a certain amount of grit at play that I think has to be there. And to Robert's point, if you're coming from a shop that has years and years behind them, you have years and years of materials, resources. You may have a grass tops advocacy person, a grassroots engagement officer. You may have all the pieces in play. And where Robert and I may have to put on an engagement hat, a coalition, leadership hat, a lobbyist hat, 4 times a day. We may just be taking them on and off the entire day. So I think for newer, you need confidence, you need curiosity, you need really to be nimble, and having the experience both on advocacy and policy is really helpful. I think too, if you have a marketing and communications perspective, enough so that you can name what you need to be successful in those areas, I think that's really critical.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Thank you, Kara. And another question I have for you all. So I'm currently in the process of regrouping with all my clients, doing a year in review, but then also planning, what are your priorities in the advocacy arena for the next 6 months, or in the 2024. So I'm wondering if you have any parting words on what you as a team are focusing on to give to the listeners today.
Yeah, so I think I shared at the beginning of the call, for me is, kind of looking now, assuming Georgia as a responsibility. So that becomes important for me to kind of understand and learn. We talked a lot about that, listening and learning and gaining knowledge of, what's important. I have done a lot of work in Georgia in the state capital, so I understand the nuances there, but from the perspective of ALS, that's going to become important, right? So the listening becomes really important. For Florida, the priority so is for me to we've got appropriations where we need appropriations to be, so it goes beyond now. We're at the level we want, so it goes to sustaining that. How do we continue that momentum to sustain it, but move and work on the issues that are harder and that are less, I say to say it this way, but sometimes not likely to happen in one session, but to really draw more attention to it because they need to have the attention. And sometimes in states where that can become hard, it can become a challenge, but it's the right thing to do, right? That's because, again, I can't stand up and say why we do what we do if I'm not willing to kind of stand up and do those things. And so engaging in those really challenging conversations with the members of the House and Senate where we need to kind of take some action different than what's been done becomes important. And so that'll be a focus for me as I move forward, along with planning and future look and getting better at working with volunteers and all that good stuff. So I know Kara, we talk about this a lot, and Kara has done a great job of helping us kind of prioritize and look to the future. And so Kara, I won't speak for you. So.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great perspective. Robert and I and the team sat down last week, and, everyone's so busy right now. So we had scheduled 90 minutes. It kept getting cut down. But all I know is we were going to go through all of our 50 states and DC and sort of do a walkthrough of what the priorities are going to look like. We have a big spreadsheet that has all this information, and then we can set up all the tags within Quorum so that we can be tracking. Matt Solomon, who's our director of state policy, works with me on the state policy and advocacy team. We kind of, will set up all the dashboards and things looking forward to the 2024 sessions in Quorum. And then that way we're all working from one place. Needless to say, Robert, how many states? I think we got through like 4 states.
We didn't get through hardly any.
Yeah, we get really excited talking about the work and the opportunities and what all we're going to do. So I think we'll probably have a few rounds of priority setting strategy sessions for 2024. Within that, we're not only naming sort of, okay, putting a check mark in the box for we're going to be working on, Medigap in Texas again. But beyond that, how do we prioritize the work within those states? What has legs in those states? What's going to not have legs? What needs to be an education campaign? And sort of organizing our work more around that campaign that I mentioned around, building patient power across the states and as a collective, what we can really do. I think the real focus there is all around affordability and access. It's amazing that we're getting new drugs to market, that we're getting FDA approved therapies to the market. If someone can't access that drug because it's either just unaffordable or it's just not included in a formulary, then what does that mean to the patient? It might as well not be there. It's no use to them. So making sure that that's really a big focus for us. I will say one thing that in preparing for 2024 that I think is helpful, we've created a template that has, it's like unique for each state. It has our branding. It has the outline of the state in the corner. And then that way the MDAs like Robert are able to pull from the priorities that they've established and put it on a piece of paper, a one-pager that will be used across all the states, but will be tailored to their state specifically. And so I'm thinking about, from our unified sort of state policy and advocacy department, we're able to put together templates that, the managing directors just have to pull down. And oftentimes those, we save them both in teams, but also we'll have the one-pagers with all of our toolkits in Quorum. So again, trying not to recreate the wheel and really resource all of those key issues that have been picked.
Great. Well, thank you so much, both like Kara and Robert. I really appreciate you sharing your time today and your wisdom and expertise. This was super helpful, and I can't wait to take back what I've heard from you all to my other clients. And so with that, everyone, we're coming to an end of our time. So the next session coming up at the top of the hour is data privacy policy in the era of AI and tech advancements. This will be a very interesting session featuring a panel of data privacy and AI experts, such as Caleb Williamson from the App Association, Sina Lloyd of the Web3 ID Coalition, and Manuel Gomez from Independent Sector. To join, simply stay in this room, and we'll be right back. And thank you again, everyone, for joining today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks.